I'm a romantic. Not only do I love love in real life, as in I love being in love, it's great, but I also love the people I love being in love. When my friends fall in love, when my family falls in love, when I see random people being in love, it makes me happy. Also, I like love in fiction, whether it's on TV shows, in movies, or in the books I read. I am one of those people who tends to ship every character together, no matter who it is. If they have chemistry, if they have things in common, I want them to fall in love. Not because I feel like everyone has to find love to be happy, but just because people being in love gives me joy. So you would think that romance would be one of my favorite genres, one of my most read genres. Unfortunately, the opposite is true. I do not read that much romance, especially not contemporary romance. I'm just as baffled as you are. And honestly, I blame the entire publishing industry because the number of tropes, especially in straight romance, that I cannot stand, it's astronomical. And I do not know why so many books have to have enemies to lovers dynamic or have to have the same 5 tropes repeated ad nauseum of the same bed and fake dating and both being guests at a friend's wedding, or just the most cringy, spicy scenes of all time. And maybe I'm just really hard to please. Honestly, I am really hard to please. I know that, okay? You don't have to tell me in the comments. I know I'm hard to please. But especially when it comes to romance, you'd think it would be easier for me to find favorites, and it really has not been. So this is a much more difficult favorites list for me to put together than a lot of these other genres that I've done. Not even every book on this top 10 got 5 stars from me, which is saying something, but I wanted to share these with you, my top 10, just in case you, like me, are a big romantic but really struggle to find romance that actually appeals to you and characters you want to root for, because it is a struggle and I have really had to wade through a lot of mediocre or plain terrible romance to find the 10 that I'm recommending you today. I decided to keep this video to adult romance only, though I have read quite a few adorable YA romances, so I will be talking about those in the bonus video. As with all the other favorites videos I've done in this series so far, from fantasy to sci-fi, horror, literary fiction, and classics, I think those are the only ones we've done so far. All of them have a bonus video with even more recommendations, and up till now they've only been available to my patrons. But as of today, I am opening up YouTube memberships for anyone who wants to get access to the bonus videos but doesn't want to join another platform for whatever reason. You can become a YouTube member and get access to those bonus videos. They will still be available to my patrons at any of the 4 paid tier levels, so if you want some of the extra rewards that you can get for being a patron, you can still go ahead and join the Patreon. The link is in the description box. Yoda wanted to say hi. Yoda loves love too. I think all these books are really great and really wholesome and sweet, and also often spicy. And on the subject of spiciness, this video is kindly sponsored by the amazing LELO. LELO has made a name for itself as the luxury pleasure brand. They are all about sex positivity and bringing satisfaction and pleasure to individuals and couples all over the world. LELO is not just a pleasure toy brand, they're also a self-care movement. Their mission is to help people all over the world discover their own bodies and find pleasure without shame, with luxury pleasure products that are designed to spark desire, stimulate your senses, and encourage endless exploration. Treat yourself to best-selling toys like this one, the Sona 2 Cruise, and even try LELO's new Love Bridge by connecting your toys to the LELO app. If you're long distance with your partner, you can both join a discreet chat room and seamlessly switch over control for your LELO devices to discover new sensations even when you're far apart. I think sex positivity is important, and I also think exploring and discovering your own body is important. Everyone is different, every body is different. What we like, what feels good to us is different. How can we ever figure out what we like if we don't experiment? Honestly, I wish more romance books had toys. Why do none of them use toys? It's such a missed opportunity. When LELO reached out and asked me which toy I wanted to try, I was immediately drawn to the Sona 2 Cruise, not only because it was one of their best sellers with so many amazing 5-star reviews, people love this toy, but also because I was really intrigued by the unique shape and how small and portable it was. It was very different from what I had tried in the past, and I'd also never tried something with sonic vibrations or something that was meant to be used without direct contact, with more of this open mouth design. So I was very curious to try it out, and 5 stars. It's great. The great thing about something like the Sona 2 Cruise is that there are 12 different settings, so you can really experiment, try different things, and of course adjust the intensity up or down depending on how you're feeling and what you want. As you probably know, the clitoris is not just what you see on the outside, it has an entire internal structure. Instead of using traditional vibrations, the Sona uses sonic pulses and waves to really deeply stimulate the entire structure, leading to bigger, better, longer, and more intense orgasms. It's also great if you're sensitive because it doesn't require any direct contact to the clitoris, which can be overwhelming depending on the person, and you can use it for hours without losing sensitivity. The Sona 2 Cruise also has an innovative cruise control technology, which holds back 20% of the toy's power so that when it's pressed up hard against you, it can increase the intensity by that 20% to make sure that you don't have any loss of intensity in the moment when you need it most. The Sona 2 Cruise is waterproof, easy to clean, and it's made out of medical grade silicone. So I'm having a great time with the Sona 2 Cruise. I would highly recommend. I'm very excited to try more of their toys. And if you want to try LELO, you can get a 15% off discount with my code PBB15. Just click the link in my description box and use my code PBB15 for 15% off. And that's a stackable discount code, so you can add it on top of other discounts on their site to try something from LELO today, to explore your own body and prioritize your own pleasure, because you deserve it. And thank you again to LELO for sponsoring this video. Okay, starting with number 10 on my list, we have Earl Crush by Alexandra Vasti. And this is a Regency era romance where our protagonist has been writing letters with a distant duke and, you know, travels to his estate to suggest that maybe they should get married, you know, for mutual benefit. And when she shows up and proposes, the Earl is very confused and doesn't know who she was. And it turns out she was being catfished. And that all happens in the very first chapter. I read something from the author about how she thought it'd be really fun to start a romance novel with a proposal. I must say that I have never seen that happen before, but it was really sweet. I really loved Lydia, our protagonist. She was incredibly endearing and sweet, and I really grew to enjoy the male love interest as well, the Earl, Arthur Baird. They start with this, not antagonistic, but Lydia is embarrassed because she, you know, proposed to a man who she thought she knew, who had no idea who she was. So she's feeling really uncomfortable. She just wants to run away, but he asks her to help him with something and she feels obligated, so she stays. And as she continues to help him and they get to know each other better, and, you know, various silly situations happen, including a herd of zebras almost taking out her carriage and him having to rescue her. There's a lot going on, but they slowly grow closer, and it's really sweet watching their relationship build. I was going to say organically, but the situation itself is not that organic, I guess, but their feelings feel very genuine. And I must admit, in the first couple chapters, I wasn't really sure how I would feel about it, because it definitely really leans into the trope of the huge male love interest and the teeny tiny female love interest. She is described as being curvier. It wasn't clear to me if she was meant to be plus size, but she is described as curvy, but she's also described as tiny in height. And he is described as gigantic and huge and so muscly, and, you know, you already know, if you've spent time here, I don't enjoy the trope of gigantic man and teeny tiny little woman, and she's so small compared to him. But as annoying as I find that, as the book went on, that became less and less relevant as they just fell for each other, and more of the dialogue or their internal monologue was about, you know, the sparkle in the other person's eye, or the expression on their face when they were looking at something beautiful, or pleasure that they got from the other person's smile, or the touch of their hand or something. And it just ended up being really sweet and really romantic. It also has a pretty exciting plot, and it's pretty fast-paced for a romance. There's a lot happening outside of the romance that needs to be figured out. There's quite an adventurous quality to it, and there are pretty high stakes, honestly. And I really enjoyed the peripheral characters as well. The book is definitely very heavily focused on our protagonists, which is fine, but we do have some peripheral characters, and they were quite fun and had really big personalities, including a gay couple who work for the male love interest, Arthur Baird, and I enjoyed that diversity there, that there was this older gay couple who were able to live their authentic lives in Scotland with Arthur Baird and get to love each other, and maybe not super realistic for the time, but I find myself not reading a lot of historical romance, maybe partially because of the lack of diversity, and maybe it is more realistic, but I like when historical romance, even when the main couple isn't a queer couple, allow queerness to exist in the world without having to confine itself to a realistic portrayal of a homophobic society. I don't know. I just like that. It makes it more wholesome to me and more enjoyable. So this wasn't a perfect book for me, in part because of that huge height gap thing, which is one of my biggest pet peeves. But the characters were really lovable, like I said, really fast-paced plot. The spicy scenes don't stand out to me as particularly incredible, but they also were not cringy at all for me, which is honestly a feat. It's hard for me to not find spicy scenes cringy. I just find a lot of the common ways that they're written too melodramatic, and I have trouble taking it seriously, but I felt like these scenes both felt realistic and also often had quite a bit of emotion, and there was some drama to the scenes maybe, but not melodramatic and not over the top. It felt grounded in a way that I appreciated. But yeah, I think overall it's just a really sweet, wholesome romance, and I would recommend if you're a fan of historical romance, I think you might enjoy this one. So moving on to number 9 on my list, and this is very different. It is not in the rom-com category, though I would still describe it as primarily romance. It is also historical romance, and it has a little bit of a fantastical element to it. There is magic. And this is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. And I've read 3 of Silvia Moreno-Garcia's books, and this one is my favorite, actually, which I don't think is very common. I think most people prefer her horror. I don't find her horror quite works for me in my personal taste, but I was really pleasantly surprised by this one. So The Beautiful Ones is a fictional world that has magic, but it is in a historical setting. And the romance is very prominent in the story. It is kind of the main plot, I would say. So we're following this young woman, Nina, who has telekinetic powers, and she wants to learn from this famous performer, Hector, who also has magic, and she ends up falling for him, and they have this sort of whirlwind romance, but there are complications in their happy ending. There are secrets, there are people who are maybe uninterested in them finding their happy ending. I was really pleasantly surprised by this one. I felt it had a really beautiful, sort of entrancing atmosphere that really draws you in, but I also appreciated the thematic elements and how it was looking at not only coming of age for this young woman, but also interrogating the ways in which patriarchy seeks to disempower women and how difficult it can be as a young woman in any time, but especially in more historic times, to push against traditional values and to make choices for your own life and for your own well-being and interests and passions in life, regardless of what is expected of you as a woman and what society wants you to do, what those rules are set up for, and sort of coming to terms with who we are and accepting ourselves. A bit of a radical acceptance kind of quality to it. Nina was a really fantastic protagonist. I was very attached to her. I was really rooting for her, and I loved how passionate she was about her interests and her wants in life. She was very strong-willed, and the romance at first was a bit of a hard sell for me, I'm not gonna lie, but I did end up really loving them together and really rooting for them and enjoying their dynamic. It just took a little bit longer for me to fully get on board, which is part of why this is a 4-star instead of a 5-star read for me. But I still really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was great overall and found the plot and the villain entertaining, even if they were a bit over the top sometimes. I think this is a fun one if you are more of a vibes reader and you want something very atmospheric and sort of lyrical and dreamy, but you still want that romance, versus something that is written more like a rom-com and is more straightforward. This has a bit more of that ephemeral, atmospheric kind of quality to it that I find, anyway, can sometimes be hard to find within the romance genre, so I would recommend it if you are interested. Next up, number 8 on my list is Don't Want You Like a Best Friend by Emma R. Alban. And this one, along with Earl Crush actually, was an influencer copy from Libre.fm because I am a creator, I am in their influencer program, and they give me access to a number of audiobooks every month for me to read and review. And sometimes I really love them, like these, and they end up on my top 10 favorites lists. So this is a sapphic historical romance, and it's set in 1857, so Victorian era, and it's sapphic. So we have 2 female main characters who are falling in love. And I love sapphic romance in general for many reasons, including the fact that it often doesn't have a lot of the same tropes that drive me up the wall in straight romance. And I absolutely loved this. I thought it was so wholesome, so sweet. The spicy scenes are very spicy, but really the star of the show here is the characterization of the two main characters, Gwen and Beth, and also their slow burn friends to lovers dynamic. They have so much chemistry, they're so drawn to each other. And while there is that element of them living in a time where they can't be openly in a relationship with each other, so there is that sort of external angst, this is a world that is more accepting of queerness than probably is realistic for the time, but I appreciate that. There are other examples of queer relationships in the book that are sort of in the peripheral characters, and their families are a lot more accepting of them than would be realistic for the time as well. So as much as it's not like a queer norm version of history where they could live out and proud as a queer sapphic couple, they can rely on people and tell people in their lives and get support, which I really appreciated. It's fiction, so it doesn't have to be realistic, and it is nice to read about queer couples in history getting to have their happy ending and getting to tell their families and their friends about their partner without it being this huge, terrible thing for them. So I really loved Gwen and Beth together. Honestly, the only reason really that this wasn't a 5-star read for me was that there was a bit of that like third act misunderstanding thing that I really don't love. I don't necessarily hate the idea of a miscommunication being part of the story, because I do think it is realistic for early on in a relationship a miscommunication to happen before you really know each other well and you've kind of sorted out your different communication styles. But this one did bug me a little bit, in part because one of the characters ends up relying on a lot of alcohol to cope with them being in this miscommunication, and it was to an extreme and very unhealthy, and there was just something about how angry they got and how much they were drinking that was sort of unsettling to me to read. But it does seem like it was maybe a despair-induced self-destructive sort of thing that hopefully is not a sign of what's to come for that character. And I did really find their reunion very, very sweet and wholesome. And I like them together. I think they're really sweet. And this is one of the ones on this list that is part of a series, at least a duology. So there is a second book in this duology, which is called You're the Problem, It's You. And this is between two men, and they're characters who know the couple in this first book. So Gwen and Beth are in the second book as secondary characters, and they're together. And then we have this new couple that's falling in love. And I didn't like the second book quite as much as the first book. I gave it 3 stars because there were more things that I didn't love about their dynamic. They have more of an enemies to lovers dynamic, and it was a bit abrupt for me, where they went from being really cruel and mean to each other to all of a sudden being really into each other, and it felt a little unrealistic. But I ended up really liking it by the end. But Don't Want You Like a Best Friend was a really, really sweet and wholesome book overall. And again, some really great spicy scenes. So if you're a fan of sapphic romance, if you're a fan of historical sapphic romance and more of a rom-com quality, friends to lovers, I would recommend this one. I really, 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 really enjoyed it. Next up on my list, number 7, is probably one you've heard of. I feel like this book and this whole trilogy was really popular when it first came out, and that is Get a Life, Chloe Brown and the Rest of the Trilogy by Talia Hibbert. I loved this when I read it, and then the other 2 books in the trilogy with the other 2 sisters, I also loved. Talia Hibbert is great. I've also read some of her YA romance and really loved it. These are contemporary romance, and the 3 sisters who are the female main characters in these 3 books are Black women. And in this first book, we follow Chloe, who has chronic illness, and that is part of her story and is something, to my knowledge, from what I remember, that the author has personal experience with. From what I remember, it was really well done. It felt very grounded and realistic and compassionate to her experience. And I saw lots of reviews at the time when I read this book, and it was really, popular online, of people saying that they felt very seen by Chloe Brown from that representation of chronic illness and living with chronic illness. So if you're more of a contemporary romance reader, you might love this one. It is a romance between a man and a woman, but it does not have so many of the tropes that drive me completely up the wall. There's some overcoming of trauma here, and unless I'm misremembering, Chloe has fibromyalgia specifically, but I think it could probably be a relatable representation for people who have a variety of types of chronic illness or chronic fatigue or chronic pain. And I just remember finding it really sweet. Chloe is a bit of a type A personality from what I remember. And the male love interest, Red, is like a grumpy artist, and they feel like a bit of an odd pairing, but they just work. So there are 3 books in this series, and it's the Brown Sisters series. So there's Get a Life, Chloe Brown, Take a Hint, Danny Brown, and Act Your Age, Eve Brown. And they're all really sweet. So I would recommend, if you haven't read them already, I mean, they're very popular, so you've probably heard of them already, but if you haven't tried them, you might end up enjoying them. Moving on to another contemporary romance. This is number, what are we on, 6 of my list, I think? Funny Story by Emily Henry. This is a very recent read. I read it in February, I think. So I've already reviewed it on my channel in that wrap up. I also reviewed it in my Goodreads Choice Awards winners video because it won in 2 categories for the 2024 Goodreads Choice Awards. And this was my 4th book by Emily Henry, 2 of which I hated with a burning passion, and 2 of which I really liked, Book Lovers and Funny Story. So this one is really, really sweet. This is probably my favorite of Emily Henry's books that I've read. I probably don't have to tell you much about Emily Henry. You've probably heard of this book and of her. She's very famous. Her books are very popular in the contemporary romance genre. This one is specifically between 2 characters who have their relationships blown up simultaneously and end up living together just out of convenience because they need a place to stay. They go from sort of loose acquaintances that don't really know much about each other to roommates, to friends, to falling in love. And I thought this was really sweet and wholesome. The female love interest is a librarian, and the male love interest is a bartender. And the male love interest, as I have said in my other reviews, I really loved. He's one of my favorite male love interests to ever read in any romance ever. And the biggest reason for that is that, as I have said multiple times, he reminds me so much of my husband, both the way he was described physically, but also his personality and even his backstory and his complicated relationship with his family, some of that trauma. He just felt very familiar. And I obviously think my husband is like the best person ever, because he is. So reading about a character that was basically just him in fictional form was fantastic. I thought he was amazing, and it would be great husband material for obvious reasons. I also thought Daphne, the female love interest, was really fun. She is going through a hard time and struggling a bit. And there's a bit of a side plot here that I found kind of relatable for Daphne because she has moved to this new place to be with her previous partner, who she now is no longer with. And all of her friendships in this new place were with people who she knew through him. So when they broke up, she suddenly felt very isolated, and she's trying to make new friends and really struggling with making new friends. And, you know, honestly relatable. It is hard to make new friends as an adult in a new place. That is something I've been going through in the last couple of years, moving halfway across the country and trying to make new friends, especially as someone who is more of an introvert and socially awkward, and I work from home. At least Daphne works in a library, so she meets people, but she also struggles with making new friends. And I thought that the way that progressed, that plot line, was realistic and showed that Daphne is a flawed character, but also was kind of wholesome and sweet. And I really liked the friendships she ended up developing. So yeah, this was really great. I loved them overcoming their separate traumas. They both had trauma from their childhoods and kind of had to figure out how to navigate that together, because in some ways their traumas were triggered by the other person, and they had to kind of figure out how to slot together in a way that didn't cause the other one to panic. And also relatable, also something that I have experience with. So I just thought this was very realistic, very wholesome, very lovely. Honestly, the biggest drawback for me with this one was that sometimes less is more with the dialogue in the spicy scenes. Maybe it's just me, but the characters don't have to narrate everything. They really don't have to. That's all I will say about that. But I would highly recommend Funny Story. And if you enjoy Funny Story, I would also check out Book Lovers. I would not personally recommend Emily Henry's other romances. I think there are a couple that I haven't read that might be good. I have no idea, like Beach Read, but I personally would not recommend Happy Place or People We Meet on Vacation because I hated them. That's just me though. Moving on to number 5 on my list, which is another contemporary romance, and this is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This is another sapphic romance, and there is a little bit of a speculative fiction element to this, but I won't say anything else about that because it's kind of tied in with some mysterious stuff that has to be figured out throughout the book. This is set in modern day New York City, and we're following our main character, August, who is bisexual, and she falls for Jane, a mysterious woman who she keeps running into on the train. And they have a really, again, wholesome yet spicy romance. I found some of the ways that this tried to explore the history of gay rights really emotional and touching for me. And I think it's nice to be reminded of the sacrifices that were made by previous generations to gain the rights that we have now, and sort of use that as a galvanizing, inspiring, motivational thing to stand up for the rights that we have and not let them be taken away from us. So I just found this really beautiful. I loved their dynamic. I loved their relationship and the way they fell for each other. There's also a bit of a found family element and some really great friendships that develop as well. I really liked this one. I thought it was really sweet. And yeah, it's a favorite of mine. It made me very emotional. Okay, moving on to number 4 on my list, which is the first book in a trilogy, and I enjoyed all 3. So it's kind of a 3-in-1 recommendation, another contemporary sapphic romance, and that's Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. Like I said, this is a trilogy. All 3 of the books in this trilogy are sapphic romances, and they're characters who know each other. So when you go into the next book, the previous couple is sort of there as secondary characters. And that's something I really like in my romances, especially if it's going to be a series, for the previous couples to sort of hang around and to get to see more of their relationship as it matures. And honestly, in a series like this, I find that whatever the final book is kind of suffers for being the last one, because when the book cuts off at the end, it feels like it's done too soon and you don't get enough of the couple together like you got for the earlier couples. Anyways, I'm mostly going to focus on Delilah Green Doesn't Care for this recommendation, but like I said, this is a sapphic romance. We have Delilah, who is a lesbian, and Claire, who is bisexual, and they know each other because they grew up together, but Claire was Delilah's stepsister's friend, one of her best friends. So they were kind of aware of each other, but they were never friends. But Delilah comes back home to her hometown for her stepsister's wedding to be her wedding photographer, and she runs into Claire again, and sparks fly. And this is, again, a very wholesome yet spicy romance. I love that pairing. And this is sort of slightly antagonistic acquaintances to lovers because they know each other, but because she has a very complicated relationship with her stepsister, she always had these like negative preconceptions about her stepsister's friends. So they are kind of overcoming those and then finding that they actually are incredibly drawn to each other. And this one is fun and different. I think out of all of these, this is the first time we have this dynamic because Claire is a single mother. So she has a daughter who I think is a preteen or maybe like around 10. So there's that dynamic as well. And I thought that really added to the wholesomeness of the whole situation. It was really sweet to see how they kind of organized that dynamic. But anyway, Delilah Green Doesn't Care is number 4 on my list. It is a favorite, and the whole trilogy is great and lots of fun. So moving on to number 3 on my list, another historical romance and another sapphic romance. And this is That Could Be Enough by Alyssa Cole. This one is a novella, I believe, but it is based on, sort of inspired by Hamilton and some of the characters in Hamilton. But it is, like I said, historical romance. It's sapphic. Both of the love interests are Black women. And one of the main characters, one of the women, Mercy, is working as a maid for Alexander Hamilton's widow. And that's the connection to Hamilton. And she meets a dressmaker who is bold and mysterious and sensual, and they end up falling for each other, and it is very spicy. It's quite a short book, but I loved the historical setting. I loved the realistic element of that historical setting and their relationship having to be a secret because of the time period. But there's also a huge amount of chemistry, the magnetism, the attraction is like off the charts between these two, and it was really great. From what I can remember, I read this years ago, so I might be forgetting some of the details, but from what I can remember off the top of my head, the spice in this one was top tier. And also for Delilah Green Doesn't Care, that whole series, the spice is top notch, top marks. Next up, we have number 2 on this list, and this one is probably the only one that has zero amount of any spice at all in it. It's definitely just romance, and that's partially because it's a classic, and that is The Blue Castle by L.M. Montgomery. This is so wholesome. We're following Valancy, who is 29 years old. She is seen as an old maid because she's not married yet. She's living with her family. She's always the butt of every joke, and she's very much a people pleaser. She's very reserved. She sticks to herself. She doesn't express her opinions about anything, and something happens in her life that just is the final straw, you know, and she can't hold it in anymore. She does not care about pleasing her family anymore. She doesn't care about being the perfect, maiden niece, she just has no fucks left. And she starts living her life for her and trying to figure out what it is that she does care about and what she values in life, and to enjoy what life has to offer. So it's kind of like a coming of age story, even though she's 29. This is her first chance to really discover who she is and what she cares about. And in the process, she meets this man who lives on a little island on a lake and is very different from the type of men that she, dreamed of spending her time with, and is a little odd and a bit of an outsider in the community. And she is sort of inexplicably drawn to him and starts spending more time with him. And very wholesome, very sweet. Loved the romance here. Loved Valancy as a character even more. And even more than that, adored the descriptions of nature. We kind of go through all the seasons, and this is set in Canada. Ella Montgomery is Canadian, and I'm biased because I'm Canadian and I love nature and I love the 4 seasons that we get in Canada, but the descriptions of each season and the way that it impacts the forests and the lake and just the quality of the air, the crispness in the air as we're starting to turn towards winter, and the wildlife that swaps out from season to season, and just the quality of the air and the sound of the wind in the leaves and all the colors and the crunch of snow under your feet. It's just so visceral. It's so atmospheric. And I love Ella Montgomery's nature writing. It's gorgeous, but Valancy's also an absolute favorite character. She's so vivid. She has so much personality. I love getting to watch her finally come into her own and live for herself and not for other people. And the romance is really wholesome and sweet as well. So if you're looking for something historical that was written closer to the time that it's set, and also something that is very, very low, like no spice, it's very, very sweet and wholesome. And that brings us to number 1 on my list, my absolute favorite romance book I've ever read. This is contemporary romance, and it is Role Playing by Cathy Yardley. And this is a romance between a man and a woman who are middle-aged. Maggie is 48, and I believe the male love interest is in his 50s, if I remember correctly. But this is so wholesome. I loved it so much. It's called Role Playing because they both play role-playing video games, and that's what they bond over. But there is just something so adorable about this romance. I loved the characters so much. I loved the way that they fell in love. I loved the way they handled the conflicts that came up in the story. I loved that even though it's a romance between a man and a woman, one of the 2 characters is bisexual and the other one is so accepting and lovely to them about it, and helps them to understand their own identity in a way that is so accepting and just healing and lovely, and I adored it. There is some biphobia and homophobia in the book from a secondary character, but it's handled very well. And the other protagonist really stands up for the one who is on the receiving end of that biphobia and homophobia in a way that just reinforced how much I loved them as a character, like just that fierce protective quality. Again, very wholesome and sweet, but also spicy. And I loved following an older couple. I loved that they were way more settled in who they are as a person. Like there was still some growth to be had, especially with a character who was figuring out their own identity and sort of finding a label for their sexuality for the first time. But they know who they are. They know their interests. They have their friends. They're more established in life. And I really need more romance books between older characters. If you have favorite romances that feature middle-aged characters or older, please let me know because I would love to read more. But this is just adorable. It's really all about accepting yourself, finding your own self-worth, second chance at romance, second chance at a happy ending, self-respect, and developing this really respectful, equal, caring, loving relationship. Because they're older, they've both had relationships that maybe haven't ended super well. So they both have their own like hang-ups and traumas that they have to work through, and it feels very realistic, but they are so loving and supportive of each other, and I just love them so much. I wish I could reread this for the first time. It made me so happy. It made me giggle and kick my feet at the romance. I just think it's adorable. So if you haven't read Role Playing yet, please do. And this is a sign to myself and a reminder to myself that I have to read more of Cathy Yardley's work, because this is the only book of hers I've ever read, and it instantly became the best romance I've ever read. So I clearly have to read more of her stuff, but this was adorable and I highly, highly, highly recommend. So that's it. Those are my top 10 favorite adult romance books that I would recommend to you. I hope you love them as much as I do. If you've read any of these, let me know your thoughts on them in the comments. And if you have more recommendations, please leave them down below. I would love to find more favorite romance. Like I said, there will be a bonus video with a couple more adult romance recommendations and all my favorite YA romances. So either join the Patreon in one of the 4 paid tiers or become a member here on YouTube to get access to all of the bonus favorites videos from every video in this series. Thank you again to LELO for sponsoring this video. Click the link in my description box and use my code PBB15 for 15% off. Treat yourself to a luxurious toy today and prioritize your own pleasure. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.